Welcome to Spotlight On, a new series produced by Accel, where we examine the technology shaping our world through conversations with the people building it.
Welcome to Spotlight on AI. I'm Ping Li, and I'm delighted to have Rene Haas, the CEO of Arm, here today. I know you're very busy, so appreciate you taking out some time.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
So some context for our listeners. Arm is the leading semiconductor IP business. Rene was appointed the CEO a year ago, 2022.
Almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years ago.
February of 2022.
And you had the pleasure, I should say, of taking the company public a couple months ago.
Indeed.
You know, Arm obviously has been a force in the semiconductor industry for a while, and with the mobile phones and now AI. So how did you end up in the semiconductor industry? And, you know, walk us through that whole journey.
Yeah, so I've been in the semiconductor industry my entire career. So I graduated out of university in the middle 1980s. I was always fascinated with semiconductors just from the standpoint of they were the building blocks of computers.
Right.
And you go back to the middle 1980s, PCs are just taking off. The first IBM compatible is now available. So knowing that semiconductors were sort of the inside and the guts of all these machines, that was really where I wanted to go. So I was at TI, which was a great place to start,
right,
because at that time, TI was the number one semi company in the world. We did DSPs, we did microcontrollers,
right,
we did DRAM.
Right.
It was a great place to start.
So you've been in the semi industry for a few decades now.
That's right.
I will have to say that in the startup world, semis have not been very popular as a place for entrepreneurs to go. I would say at least for 15, 20 years now.
Yeah.
So it'd be great if you can give us a little history for our audience on what do you think are the big changes that have occurred over the decades in the semi, the CPU industry, and then how's Arm played a role in that transformation over the years?
So on one level, you know, it's interesting with we were chatting earlier about COVID.
Yeah.
COVID, I think, was a great opportunity to kind of let the world know again that semiconductors are incredibly important.
Right.
All the supply shortages that we saw, people
right.
started to realize, oh my gosh, this was all due to chips. And why does it take me a year to get a new key fob for my car?
Right.
Because one component inside the device, which is a chip, was not able to run it. So I think what people began to realize that, oh my gosh, semiconductors are fundamental to everything that we do.
Right.
And then with everything involved now going forward with AI, any kind of AI capability needs to be powered by semiconductors. However, on the flip side, you know, to your point about the investment and whatnot, the chips, to develop these chips has just gotten harder and harder over the years and decades, and much, much more expensive.
Yeah.
To build a chip, to design it, to fab it, to have it packaged, to have it come back. These are hundreds of millions of dollars in investments.
Yeah.
And if you think about the VC community, and particularly, you know, over the last decade or so, would look at software startups and would look at the amount of money invested and time to return the money. Yeah. And then you look at a chip company, it's like, oh my gosh, I've got to put in all this money.
Yeah. And hope the tape out works.
And hope the tape out works, and hope I have customers, and hope I can scale.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really, really tough. So I think that's why you've seen a bit of the ebb and flow with semiconductors. But on the flip side, I think with a lot of things that we've seen with like AI processor startups, the one thing that continues to happen in our world is more and more kind of complex compute problems get thrown at us. And people will look at the conventional solutions and then say, well, what I have today doesn't really scale, because one of the beauties of semiconductors and then applications is it's always smaller, faster, cheaper.
Yeah.
And innovation is always taking place. Now, one of the beauties about Arm is our core technology is a CPU. Yeah. And the CPU is really fundamentally core to any digital device. It is the brain. It has to run the software. It has to essentially be the mechanism that drives every device. So Arm, which has been around for 33 years, is really now the most ubiquitous CPU that's ever shipped in the history, I think, of digital electronics. You know, almost 30 billion in the last year that were shipped, 7 billion or so, 8 billion or so a quarter. These are giant, giant numbers. Yeah. And with a CPU, which is what Arm builds, it's sort of a self-perpetuating cycle in that the more CPUs that are there, the more that developers will write to those CPUs because it's the installed base. There's a lot of software. There's a lot of development opportunities. And ARM is used in automobiles, data centers, mobile phones, laptops, just about everything. The more developers that write to it, the more people that build hardware to support the architecture. So ARM now is pretty central to just about everything in the digital universe. We calculate that probably 70% of the world's population touches ARM in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, what's always fascinating about ARM, it wasn't a hardware company. Mm-hmm. It's a software company.
It's a software company.
It's an IP licensing business. So tell us a little about how that's different than conventional wisdom, where you have to actually be building the hardware, you'd be vertically integrated with the supply chain, the fabs, and ARM kind of went a totally different direction.
You kind of have to go all the way back to the birth of the company, right? So the company was born out of a joint venture between Apple and VLSI Technology.
Right.
And it was essentially, at that time, the two companies were looking to design the next CPU for the next handheld PDA, a.k.a., for folks who remember, the Newton.
Yeah.
So the Newton was a device that
didn't do so well.
Had a lot of things right. It was a handheld, ran off a battery, had a small display, could manage contacts. It just was at a time where none of that technology was kind of all really ready for it. But ARM, the two companies basically created this joint venture and picked a small number of engineers who had spun out of a company called Acorn to do the design.
Got it.
And they chose at the time a RISC architecture. Mm-hmm. At the time back then, most of the processors were CISC, meaning complex instruction computing sets, and the CISC machines were kind of high power, pretty costly. So they designed their own machine that was going to be RISC-based. Mm-hmm. So ARM stands for Advanced RISC Machine. Mm-hmm. That was really it. Yeah. Now, what the joint venture didn't really do so well, but a number of investors looked at it and said, well, this is a rather interesting technology approach. Right. Why don't we create the CPU, but rather than build the chip ourselves, we will take that design like a blueprint and license it to people who want to build chips. Yep. And that was sort of the birth of the company, which going back to the mid-1990s, early 1990s, was pretty risky. You know, the EDA industry in terms of taking...
Like open sourcing, before open sourcing became...
All of this was brand new. The tools really weren't there. Yeah. The technology wasn't there. Yeah. It was a very, very innovative business model. Yeah. And back then, there were a lot of companies designing CPUs. Right. But designing CPUs are really, really hard. Right. They're really, really expensive. Yeah. And Robin Saxby and the team that started, they really had an initiative that said, we're going to build the global standard for CPUs. Right. And the very first big design win they got was with TI for a Nokia baseband phone. Okay. So the company was born through the next phase after the PDA because they knew how to do low power. Right. They knew how to do batteries. Right. Nokia was looking for a partner to build a chip for the phones. TI was the partner.
But you said it was really good at analog back then.
Really good at analog. Right. And back then, the harder problem on those phones, if you remember those early mobile phones, they didn't run displays. They didn't have text messages. The hard part was the analog and the modem. Right. But they needed a CPU for something because you had to control the device. You had to be the base engine. Right. So we became the brain of the first GSM phone, for those who remember out there in your listening audience, the Nokia phone based upon a TI chip. And it was born from there.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, because then what kind of spun from that was the phones got a little bit smarter. Right. They created an operating system called Symbian. Yep. Symbian became the OS, the Nokia OS. Right. And then next thing you know, ARM is starting to run rather really complex software for a mobile phone. Right. The real launching pad was with iPhone and Android, when these mobile phones went from not so smartphones to smartphones. Right. And we became the brain of those smartphones, which was quite natural, right? We had come from the phone industry. We were running those already. And then things really, really took off with iPhone and the Android phones. Yeah.
Was it hard to explain, because I want to get back to the IPO you just had, to investors that you're a software company and not a hardware company?
It's hard to explain from the standpoint
because you think semiconductors, you think, it's hardware and you guys are in that ecosystem.
Yeah.
And deployed in more hardware than anywhere else, right?
And in some ways, we're a little bit of the best of both worlds because we're in the hardware industry clearly.
Yeah.
The people that are our customers build chips.
Right.
Whether that's Samsung, whether that's Apple, whether that's Qualcomm or MediaTek, they build chips. Yeah. And we go into phones. So clearly we're in that space. Yeah. So we explain ourselves in terms of semiconductors, design wins, volume.
Right.
But our operating model in terms of the economics look like a software company because we don't build anything and we don't have any inventory and we don't have any scrap. So you look at our business model, you say, oh my gosh, this is essentially 100% gross margin business. Right. And that when I joined Arm, I was with NVIDIA for a lot of years. And I remember joining Arm and I was so happy to kind of enter a world of, oh my gosh, I don't have to worry about what scrap to write off this quarter. I don't have to worry about what to forecast into the fabs. We just license our software, which is, again, a software model. And then the beauty of the model is not only do we license it and collect a license fee like a SaaS model, but we also collect a royalty. That is, on every component that ships, we get paid some percentage of that selling price. So we've got two revenue streams. We've got sort of the SaaS stream and the royalty stream, which is pretty unique. There's really nothing else quite like it. So to your question in terms of explaining it to folks on the roadshow, that's an education process. Because as you know well, people try to compare you to something. And we're not very easy to compare to anyone because we're quite unique.
And just on the IPO, what kind of drove that? You know, I know there was there's always investors wanting, liquidity and all that kind of stuff. But from your perspective as a CEO, kind of what was the reason why it was important to you?
First off, it was time. SoftBank, Arm was a public company for many years. I think we went public the first time in 1998, and public company, and were bought by SoftBank in 2016. So when we were bought by SoftBank, the intent was someday to take the company public again. Around 2020, we were acquired by NVIDIA, and we went through a fairly long acquisition process with regulatory, et cetera, and we all know that did not how all that turned out. So when I became,
and you were at the company already then.
I was.
Okay.
I was there right there during all that process. So when the NVIDIA transaction tipped over and I became the CEO. SoftBank was very clear that they wanted to take the company public again. So that was always the intent. And for us, I think for starters, our employees expected it, but more importantly, it just helps us retain talent and attract talent because Arm is competing with some of the largest companies in the world for all kinds of design talent, and being a public company really, really helps. So long and short of it, it was really time. So we
didn't matter to your customers. Do they care as much if you were public or private? Or
I think in general, the customers were kind of happy that the NVIDIA thing didn't happen. Because they were worried, about control. They were worried about roadmaps. So I think whether we were private or public, I'm not sure they had a strong bias, but I think for the employees, it was a very important thing.
As startup companies that are reaching that stage, what kind of advice would you give them, having just gone through it? And what are things that you wish you would have done differently potentially?
So we're a unique company, right? Because we went public, but we have a lot of different things than startup companies. In other words, we had revenue, we had customers, people knew who we were. But one thing that was really obvious to me going through kind of the IPO process, and I think this probably applies whether you're our size at
even our pre-IPO companies that are ready, they're a couple $100 million in revenues and they want to go.
I think path to profitability is really, really important. It was really obvious that a lot of questions that we had was really around not only are you going to make money, but can you make money profitably? And I think that is the big thing that, and again, the IPO market is so hard to predict and is a bit fickle. But it certainly feels like there is a strong appetite for show me how you're going to be profitable. So I think my advice to counseling to companies who are looking to go do that is make sure that is pretty well understood and that the pathway to making money is something that you can explain clearly.
And how do you balance that with growth? I mean, obviously you're in a high growth sector and a high growth company. Like, how do you balance that profitability with growth, and how do you?
Now for us, which is a very profitable company. It is really much more of a balancing act. And my CFO and I, we have this discussion and debate all the time about back to the operating margin and gross margins. how to make sure we invest. I'm pretty ambitious on this scale, particularly now given where we are with all things AI. I think we are entering a cycle of increased investment. Yeah. And when I say that, I just look at all of the computing demands that AI will put across every device that we use. And that is going to need more and more computer cycles, more and more advanced technology. So I do want to invest as much as we can because I think we are in an opportunity here where some really, really cool innovation is going to take place.
How do you think ARM is equipped to intersect that? Because when we talk AI, there's so many layers, so many aspects of it. Yeah. What's the part that you're most excited about for ARM?
On one level, AI has been happening already, right? When you think about security cameras that can do face detection today, when you think about translation on your phone, when you think about telling your Google Assistant or Amazon Alexa to do a few things, that's already AI, right? Yeah. So on one level, that's already been happening. And a lot of that happens on ARM because of the fact that most of these commands run on CPUs. The software is fairly standard. Right. You can't really run AI today, without ARM. However, I think what we've seen with ChatGPT and these large language models is and this is the way technology works, right? Is a step change in terms of capability. And right now, I think we are in this, as I mentioned earlier, in this increased investment cycle around, these models that have just come out are really, really sophisticated. And what seems to be the limiter in terms of getting these models better? It's compute cycles. It's actually running more and more of these models because you're training these models on how to learn. And it's almost now a function where, how do you train it to learn? You need to give it more information, and you need to give it more experiences, and you need to give it more data to learn on, which is sort of a virtuous cycle because I need more data. And if I need more data, I need more compute to run the compute. And then I need to do it in such a way that doesn't consume a lot of power. So that's a great place for ARM because one of the things I think gets overlooked a little bit about this wave of next generation computers is the energy consumption is very significant. And I think what's going to happen over time is that these giant data centers, you're not going to be able to actually power them all. There's not enough energy on the grid to build all these super AGI data centers. So all of these data centers require computers, obviously. They require accelerated computing. They require base computing. It's a great place for ARM. One of the proof points that I like to talk about is NVIDIA's new design called Grace Hopper. So NVIDIA is sort of the gold standard for accelerated computing, but all these accelerated computing elements have to have a central processor to do not only offloads, but conjunction type of computing because the CPU can do it at lower power. NVIDIA took their next generation GPU, which used to be coupled with an x86 processor, and now they've integrated it with 72 or 144 ARM CPUs in a highly integrated design that allows them to be much more power efficient. So for ARM, we're going to be at the center of this, whether it's a cloud data center, whether it's your autonomous vehicle, whether it's your smartphone or your laptop. All of these models are going to run and run and run, and they're going to require far more compute cycles and capability than we had before just because it's learning so fast.
One of the things we've been trying to figure out, and be curious what you're seeing, is what are the applications and software layers on top, people building on top of ARM that you think is the most interesting in the next, year, 2, 3 years? What are you seeing people do with ARM that you're like, whoa, that's going to be game changing for AI?
I think when you start getting into, and some of these were in the demos that were just even shown by Google on their latest Gemini launch, is computers that can write software. And when you start getting into tools that can really, really advance productivity, the flywheel really starts to accelerate. And there are things that run the gamut from doing analysis of thousands of scientific papers where you're trying to do some analysis on whether it's drug research or some level of medical research. You're trying to comb through all the literature today to not only determine what's relevant, but how is it important? How can I parse through that? The AI is going to be able to make that kind of information come much more easily and naturally.
Yeah.
So whether it's around drug research, I think medicine is going to be an amazing place.
Okay.
And I also think just things like diagnostics and being able to not only handle diagnostics on a base case, but diagnostics that are very, very tuned for yourself.
Right.
I think a doctor's visit in the next 5 to 10 years is going to look incredibly different.
Right.
And you think of today still. Going into a doctor's office and having a clip pad of a new patient and filling out just this kind of stock information.
Yeah.
With AI, you're going to have incredible access to databases on your health information and such. Now, with that, a lot of questions around privacy and regulation. But I do think whether it's health, whether it's around developing code, whether it's around just taking other tasks that were made more simple, I think the next number of years are going to be incredibly exciting.
What are some of the challenges you see, for AI to be truly mainstream and truly adopted by, the broader population?
I think a number of things have to take place. The EU just came out with their first set of kind of AI regulations of things that are said to be prohibited and then things that should be monitored, which is a fantastic start.
Yeah.
I think in any of these cases, the machines have to have some level of mechanism or backdoor or some capability that allows human override. Otherwise, you have the machines controlling the machines.
So it sounds like a sci-fi movie.
It sounds like a sci-fi movie, but it's not far away, right? And I think that's, to your point, that's kind of the scary / cool thing about all this.
Right.
This is all stuff that we probably thought about but didn't think in our lifetime. We had to sort of think about.
Right.
But now we do. And I think the fail-safe mechanisms need to be put in place across the board.
So you guys, you mentioned NVIDIA earlier. You worked at NVIDIA, obviously, too. How's that partnership been so productive? It seems like it's been a win-win for both companies. And, a lot of times in startup land, it's kind of like, hey, zero-sum game. I win, you lose. And how have you been able to navigate that?
One of the things that is increasingly obvious about this business, going back to sort of the why it's so hard to build semiconductor companies, is these things are really, really hard to do.
Right.
And if you can find places where the two companies can be very complementary in things that they're quite good at to get to a common end game, that is where great partnerships live. So let's take NVIDIA for a moment. Yeah. They do a lot around accelerated computing. They have obviously a huge platform with H100. But they also have their robotics platforms, their Xavier and Jetson. They do a lot of things with autonomous driving.
Yeah.
Every single one of those applications that I just mentioned
has an ARM processor.
Has an ARM processor.
Right.
Every single one.
Yeah.
And it's partially because NVIDIA looks at it, and this was how we looked at it when I was there. There's only so many things that I can focus on as a company relative to my core competency. And ARM has a broad ecosystem. There are tons and tons of developers that support on ARM. It makes sense to partner with leading edge CPU company to build these platforms. So that's a good example of just both companies really kind of realizing, hey, this is where our core competency is, and finding a great way to have a partnership.
And the cloud providers, how do they fit into the ARM world? I know you supply a lot of semiconductors to them, but they also talk about building a lot of their own stuff. Like, how is that?
It's a great place for us because what's happened over the last number of years is the hyperscalers have increasingly looked to do their own chips.
Yep.
Now, there's a number of reasons why they would look to do that. One of the easier things to look at is, do they get a benefit in terms of price and performance?
Yeah.
And by building their own chip and going directly to a TSMC or a Samsung or even an Intel, they can get a tremendous amount of benefit by just directly dealing with the fab.
Yeah.
And then the economics work. Then the ARM processors, back to why we're so good in smartphones, we're the most power efficient architecture on the planet. So companies see a huge advantage from going to ARM, in some cases 40% better performance for the same power. So what's happened is we have companies like AWS with Graviton that have announced products. Microsoft just announced their product called Cobalt. Takes 128 core ARM CPUs.
Right.
These are custom chips built by Amazon, built by Microsoft, that run in the cloud data center. And they are alternatives to off-the-shelf product from AMD and or Intel. And I think that trend is going to continue. I think you'll see every major hyperscaler doing this.
And they would be licensing ARM technology.
And they would be using ARM technology to do that. Yeah.
And I guess that's why that software model allows you guys to ride these hardware trends without being tied to
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we've been involved in doing stuff for the cloud data center for almost 10 years. And all the hard work relative to the Red Hat distributions, the Linux distributions, Kubernetes, all that software, which is giant work, has largely been completed and validated. So now it's a very natural lift for the Amazons and Microsofts of the world. Microsoft runs Windows on ARM, so they can run Windows in the data center. So all that software work has been taken care of. And at the same time, you have a very, very power efficient architecture. So the cloud data center is going to be a very, very high growth area for us. And back to NVIDIA, they have their Grace Hopper design. Grace is their CPU. So if you're a Amazon, you can use Graviton, or you can buy a Grace processor, or Ampere, one of our other partners that makes standalone products using ARM. So we're very, very excited about what's going on with the cloud data center.
And I guess the other end of the cloud is the edge, right?
Yep.
And is edge computing, how do you guys drive that? Is that IoT? Are those all different areas that you guys have played a role in?
Yeah, so the edge, or sometimes we call it the IoT, the Internet of Things, is also an area that is really, really growing quickly in terms of complexity of the computer that takes place there. So in the past, you might have just have a small sensor, and that small sensor might be sending a little bit of data to the cloud. But now what's happening is that these edge devices, the processing takes place there. And why does it take place there? Privacy, security is a very, very big deal. Latency is a big, big deal. If you can do things at the edge and not have to send data back out to the cloud, it's actually preferred.
And power is a big constraint there, right?
Power is a huge constraint. Many of these things run off batteries. Heat and space are usually a major issue. But that's a great place for ARM. So we're the world's leader in all these edge devices that run IoT today.
So given all this proliferation of, applications that require semiconductors, and I think it's going to be nonlinear with the AI movement. How do we think about the supply chain issue? Like, how do you find? I mean, that seems to be the bottleneck, right? And it's obviously in some ways good in the sense that the prices go up, but for semiconductors, but I would say that does impact adoption and speed of innovation, right? If prices are high, right? So how does that get resolved?
Yeah, one thing that we were really happy to see was all the efforts done by the U.S. with the U.S. CHIPS Act, and then also in the EU with the EU CHIPS Act. Because I think the governments have woke up in these two geographies and said semiconductors is pretty core to us. And it's not just geopolitical resiliency, it's kind of geographical resiliency. It's having all of the fabs in the world located in one part of the world physically. And then you look at how important semiconductors are. You say, well, what if all the oil in the world came from one small island? You'd say, well, you'd fix that problem as fast as you possibly could. So I think with semiconductors, independent of the geopolitics, investments in fabs in Europe, investment in fabs in the United States, going back to my TI days, there were fabs in Houston, fabs in Dallas, and I think it's great to see that this is happening. I wish it happened faster. But hey, it's better to start now than not have done anything. Because I think over the next decades, that is going to be, to your question, one of the leading things that will be a limiter to growth is just fab capacity and resiliency in supply chain.
And this is somewhat of a personal question because I have kids that are trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives. For a while, everything was to be a software engineer. That was the cool thing to do, and probably when you were thinking about what to do after college, it was electrical engineering, building chips. Do you think that swings back, that kind of the need for that kind of talent?
It's interesting going back to the coding example, right? In terms of will we need designers anymore if computers can design? But I think there's always going to be areas for areas of innovation and creativity.
Yeah.
I think semiconductors would be a great place to get into, to be honest with you. Whether you're on the area of building them, because that's a very, very hard problem in terms of process and the chemical engineering associated with it. If you're on the circuit side, for sure, all kinds of innovation. I think it'll still be a while until AI has the breakthroughs around creativity and innovating. Because if you just think about the way these models work today is they take all the information they kind of know and they brute force it into something that here is the answers. But how do you create something new when you don't have anything in the past to look at? And that is going to be one of the interesting things that happens in terms of innovation. So back to your question in terms of what to recommend your kids to go into, I think anything around creating something new and inventing something new, I think there's still going to be lots of opportunity for that.
One of the hardest things about building a company is building the team. And I know you had to make a lot of those changes when you took the CEO job at Arm. How did you go through that process of figuring out who's the right people, what are the right roles, how to recruit, all the pieces that go into build, because it takes great companies are about great people, right?
Completely.
Yeah.
No, completely. And I would say in this case, if I think about it, I don't know that I've ever thought about it so purposefully forward in terms of, well, here's how I need to sort of segment the team. But I also tend to think about, if I look backwards in terms of, well, how are the teams that were created, that got built, that I resonated with. So a few things I'll kind of say on that. First off, I'm a big sports fan, and basketball was always the game that I played growing up and played in school.
What's your team? What's your favorite NBA team right now?
Probably the Warriors. But I'm a historical Kareem, Magic Johnson, Showtime Lakers guy. Right. But longer story, LeBron and the Lakers, and it's a bit like I know how to root for that. So, and I love the Warriors. I love how they're put together. But if you look at those teams, they are a fantastic complementary set of skills across players. Basketball is not a sport where 5 people with the same talent who have the same skill set can win. You need a complement of areas. So when I think about teams looking back, whether I thought about it intentionally or just turned out that way, I try to build teams that are different skill sets. There are some people who are very, very good at strategy. There are some people who are very, very good at execution. There are some people who are very, very good in terms of how they can think through problems. So I look for a really complementary team. But at the same time, and again, this is just how I've learned to operate, having transparency and trust across the team. And again, basketball is a bit of that, because once you learn how to work together and play together, you know where your teammates are going to be. You trust them to do the right job. I really like to have teams operate in such a way that don't have side meetings outside the room, be highly aligned, be highly transparent, need to get things done in a very, very fast way. So you need trust and transparency across the team. So I definitely look for that. I look more for attitude than at times versus actual individual skills, because you can teach people how to learn certain things, but changing their attitude, that's much harder to go off and do.
Right.
So I look for people who are competitive, who want to win, but are also trusting and can operate well inside a team that are very, very complementary. So the team that works for me now, my executive team, we've been together for a long, long time, 5, 6, 7 years. Yeah, because what happened when I took over the group inside Arm that now is kind of classic Arm, it was the core IP business. Had to make some changes because we didn't have some skills. I thought maybe the attitudes weren't right, so we had to make a bunch of changes. But now this core team, we've worked together for a long, long time, and there are a lot of times where that team can go off and make changes and do things, without me. So back to the sports analogy, longevity matters, right? Once a team gets used to working together and is really, really efficient and trusting, you can get a lot done.
So what's your favorite interview question that you usually ask when you're trying to figure out if the exec team fits all those boxes that you just?
I think interviewing is really hard. I think it's really, really hard. And as you get into more senior levels, people are really, really good interviewers.
You're right. That's how they got there, right?
That's how they got there. Sometimes when you get really, really talented individuals, You find that they can be overly political, or they're going to go off and try to manage things in their own way. It's really hard, I have found, for me personally. Maybe there are better guys than me, but I'm not that great at that. So I really try hard to circle the wagons and get information in terms of how they operated on the outside.
That's great.
I think interviewing is hard.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's
really hard.
Being the CEO is incredibly stressful. You got traveling the world, you got public investors and all kinds of stuff. How do you keep your balance? How do you keep your sanity? What do you do outside of ARM that keeps you from going crazy?
Yeah, a lot of people have mentioned that to me. And I have to say, I have not found the job to be that way.
Yeah.
I feel very fortunate to lead a company that has, everything we just talked about, right? The opportunity for ARM, the breadth of technology. Right. We're a profitable company. We have a great business model. So if I was running a company that didn't have any of those things, I may say, this is really, really stressful. So I don't find it massively.
So the first thing is pick a good company. That's
pick a good company in a field you're passionate about and work with people you like.
Yeah.
If you've got that lowers the stress level quite a bit. It really does.
Sure.
If you can, I know that sounds much simpler than described, but company's great. Mm-hmm. Team I work with is great. Yeah. And the stuff we're working on is intellectually stimulating. Yeah. So I don't find it all that stressful from that side. Yeah. So you asked the question, what do I like to do outside of outside to relieve the stress? Back to the sports thing. Yeah. I like watching a sports game. If for no other reason, it's a reality TV show. Right. Where for a couple hours you can watch it and there's a winner and a loser, and then you can get rid of it, and you can just kind of move it out to the back of your brain. Yeah. But people will tell you I am a workaholic because I do find the stuff we're working on incredibly exciting because you're back to the science fiction thing. Yeah. I mean, what could be more exciting than talking about how to figure out how machines aren't going to take over the world? Right? Well,
yeah, I mean, you're ARM and you're at the epicenter.
And we're at the epicenter.
And some pretty transformative technology changes along the way.
Yeah.
So this is going to be the last podcast for 2023 for Spotlight. So looking back, and then we'll do the look forward, but looking back, what happened in 2023 that you were like, I did not see that coming?
I didn't see my granddaughter being born on July 14th.
Congratulations.
I guess I kind of knew that I was going to have a granddaughter a year ago. But no, 2023 was an amazing year for the company and me personally because, as I said, had a granddaughter that joined us on July 14th, which is a really cool, amazing thing. So I think for 2023, for me personally, about as good a year as I could have hoped for.
That's exciting. So, congrats. Yeah. And so 2024 predictions, things that you hope will happen.
I don't know how to predict it, to be honest with you. Yeah. I think we are, with AI and all the things that we've got in front of us, we've got some very, very fascinating technology problems in front of us and some really, really interesting regulatory problems.
Does ARM get pulled in all the regulatory?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Because we're at the center of a lot of things. Yeah. So our thoughts, our opinions, our technology, we get pulled into a lot of folks. So I hate to be a downer on your podcast in terms of predictions. Yeah. But I have learned that it is hard to make predictions on what's going to happen in the next 12 months.
I was hoping you'd do my job for me, but I guess I got to figure that out for myself. But no, thank you very much, Rene. Really appreciate you.
My pleasure.
Taking the time.
Thank you for having me.